This episode of the Productivityist podcast is brought to you by Gusto. What is Gusto? Well, it rhymes with musto or rusto, as in let's do it once more with Gusto. But Gusto is also easy online payroll, benefits, and HR built for modern small businesses. To get 3 months for free when you run your first payroll, visit gusto.com/timecrafting. I'll have more about Gusto during this episode, but for now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the Productivityist podcast. I am your host, Mike Vardy, and this week on the show, Scott Amyx joins me. He is the author of Strive, How Doing the Things Most Uncomfortable Leads to Success. And this book has been endorsed by the likes of Tony Robbins, Forbes, the Tribeca Film Festival, and other influencers out there. And what's interesting is, as I was reciting the intro to this, just the title, initially, as I said, it was kind of like, oh, I got a bit of an uncomfortable feeling because I know that you have to get outside of your comfort zone in order to be more successful. And we dive into that and so much more in this episode. There's steps involved. There's a lot that we can get into, and we're going to get into it right now. So here's my conversation with Scott Amyx here on the Productivityist podcast. Enjoy. I'd like to welcome Scott Amyx to the Productivityist podcast. Scott, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Mike.
Now you're on the road right now, right? Yeah, so you're in travel mode right now as we're doing this interview. So everyone kind of keep that in mind. If there's a little bit of cutting out, that's what happens. But you know, I mean, when you're trying to be productive, you're going to be productive wherever you are, right? I think that's the key. That's the key. So Scott, first off, for those who don't know about you or haven't heard much from you, can you share with my audience a little bit about who you are? And what, I mean, you're the author of the book Strive, which, you know, and you've written other books as well, but that's the one that you know, that we're going to primarily focus on today. It's called Strive, How Doing the Things Most Uncomfortable Leads to Success. And let's just dive in a little bit into who you are, what led you to write this particular book.
Sure. Great. Thank you for that, Mike. So as a way of introduction, I am a venture capitalist and a thought leader and a futurist. So I do quite a bit of speaking and thought leadership. And specifically in the area of fourth industrial revolution and smart cities. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book is when Wiley approached me some time back and asked me to consider writing, you know, I thought about the kind of the usual technical subjects I usually cover, but then I thought what I experienced as I traveled the world is that of resistance to change. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to address that first before I talk about the technologies underpinning the fourth industrial revolution. So just to give you a little bit more concreteness is that when we think about what's happening, whether it's talking about the autonomous vehicle sector or the electric vehicles, or whether we're talking about renewable energy sectors or industrial manufacturing, particularly the application of Internet of Things or AI, all these large areas, including cryptocurrencies and blockchain, are fundamentally changing and challenging society, business models, and general paradigm. However, with that said, there is overwhelming resistance to change. So there was a article from Wall Street Journal talking about how, though there is this incredible momentum around blockchain and initial coin offerings, that the institutional side, the Wall Street as an example, are very much still resistant. And part of that, I think, it has to do with our human nature. When I give talks, whether it's about AI or robotics or hyperautomation, typically the general under their breath kind of response that people have in the audience is, I hope some of these things never happen in my lifetime, or I hope that it happens after I retire. Mm. Or in the case of corporate entities or even government public sector, is that this general resistance to change is causing mayhem. So if you look at the example of the retail sector and the kinds of billions of dollars in market capitalization that's been destroyed because retailers, anchor stores, and brands simply just going out of business and filing for bankruptcy because they cannot or will not transform themselves to compete in an e-commerce, Amazon-centric world. That is the real issue at hand. So what Scribd is trying to address is that real fundamental transformative change starts with the individual, then the family level, then the tribal, then the organizational, then the regional, national, and so forth. But it starts with us first.
So why are people so? We've talked about resistance to like fear and things like that, and is it growing up, I mean, my parents and lots of parents out there were like, the new technology would show up and they'd be like, no, things the way they were just fine, and now we're seeing some old technology come back into play, which we're familiar with, such as, vinyl and all that stuff. Why are people so resistant to change it? And further, Matt, why do they almost rail against it? In terms of, is it that comfort factor? Is that a lot to do with it, or is it fear, or what have you found when in your research, not just for this book, but as you've explored this topic in general?
I'll give you two examples. One is when we think about the general spectrum of cyber-physical hyper-automation, whether it's a convergence of AI, artificial intelligence, robotics, robotic process automation, and any other forms that can actually essentially help create tremendous efficiency in task. The immediacy in terms of response, certainly in organizations, is that of fear of loss of job. So what happens is the middle managers and the staff level find that they believe that the way to protect their job and their kingdom, their domain, is to resist and to prevent these automations from coming into the workspace. When in fact, the CEOs are feeling tremendous pressure from shareholders as well as Wall Street and analysts to transform not just their company, but the overall industry. And to do that, margins are getting thinner and everyone is looking for operational efficiency and new business models that can actually grow their top line. So number one, again, I think the prime example of the reaction to resistance to change comes from their personal fear of their safety, financial safety, and so forth. The second example I'm going to give you is that of, let's say, oil and gas. You would think that those that are heavily invested into oil and gas infrastructure will be one of the first ones to embrace renewable energy because they know they need to switch over. Now, depending on which reports you look at, you're looking at depletion of oil within the next 25 plus years. But it's a very finite set of resource. So if you don't invest into something else, you're going to find yourself in a very tough spot, right? However, very much like if you think about the first industrial revolution and trains and airplanes, the tycoons that own the railroads, when they saw the airplanes, the last thing they said to themselves is that, that barely flyable vehicle, there's no way that's going to in any way compete with our cargo and shipments in terms of supply chain logistics. So they were the last ones to invest into the airline industry. But as we can see now, I mean, most of the distribution and supply chain is done by trucks and airlines because a lot of the packages tend to be small. And this is exactly why Amazon is investing into drones, as an example, to deliver packages. So the problem there in the second example is that the incumbents that have made money in building out these industries are not likely to let go of their cash cow. And as much as you think it's logical to divest and diversify, oftentimes they don't do that.
So let's dive a little bit deeper into this idea of striving, right? Into strive, because I think when it comes to the point of all of these changes that are going on and leading to so many things that are uncomfortable, how you could do those things and deal with those uncomfortable things and still be successful. You've developed this kind of methodology around this, right? Like this kind of path to being able to do that. Is that correct?
That's right. That's exactly it. And I think really I try to speak to the individual level from the perspective of success.
Right.
And I think most of us, in particularly your listeners, are those that are looking for that extra edge to be productive, whether as freelancers, entrepreneurs, or in the corporate context. And in that work environment, it is changing ways that we can't even begin to imagine. I just want to just veer up just a little bit before I get into Strive, is that if you take into context, let's say Microsoft HoloLens, augmented reality particularly, as well as mixed reality, we're going to be tether free. So we don't need to be sitting in front of a laptop or some sort of a machine. We can be walking about, and that has huge implications in terms of where we converge to work and travel to work, as well as the ability to telecommute and to be able to conference in a almost a real sense without actually being physically there. And it also changes even physical things like commercial real estate and the way they design office spaces, because we're, again, not tethered to desk and office space anymore. So that's a kind of productivity gains that we're going to have in the very near future. And this is already happening to a great extent. And as someone who's actually very much pioneering smart cities and the way we work within smart cities, we see this coming. Coming back to Strive is that first and foremost, in this constant change, how do we succeed, right? And first, before we can address it, we have to uncover some of the myths about success, because I think some of those misconceptions tend to kind of have a tight rein or hold on us and keeps us from thinking openly and flexibly and being agile. So, for example, one of the things we're told on a regular basis is if we pursue our passion, that will be successful, right? Do what you love and success will follow.
Right. That's Cal Newport's mentioned that in his book, So Good They Can't Ignore You as well. It seems to be counterintuitive advice rather.
Absolutely. But look at YouTube. And it's funny because my son, when he brought back, I think last year's school yearbook, a lot of the kids, they wrote that they aspire to become YouTubers. So in other words, there's so many artists and actors that are passionate about whatever that their art form is, but will never become famous.
Right. And
YouTube, of course, is full of them. The second thing is we're also told that we need to put in some 10,000 hours to become an expert in something.
Yep.
Well, that sounds great. It seems very logical, actually. But then again, look at all the millions of kids who play soccer all year round or some other sports for 10, 15 years, but will never make pro or go to the Olympics. And that's just a fact. Or another one is something special about you, right? Maybe you're smarter, maybe you have a great pedigree, you come from a great background. Well, that was the case for Samuel Langley. And that's a beautiful story. And there was a wonderful book about this as well. Samuel Langley was a professor. He was secretary of the Smithsonian Institution. He was a member of high society. And he even received significant funding to develop a piloted airplane. But yet he was beaten by the Wright brothers, who had no pedigree, no connection, no money. It's very interesting. And then lastly, Malcolm Gladwell attributes success to other hidden variables, such as the year that you were born,
right,
your upbringing, luck, as an example. That's great, but what about everyone else that wasn't born in 1956 or didn't have that particular luck or favorable circumstances? So what I wanted to write about in Strive is how do you create a methodology that anyone, regardless of luck, background, 10,000 hours, or passion, can actually apply and consistently start to see gains in terms of success. And that secret is something that I call Strive. And fundamentally, it comes down to doing the most uncomfortable thing that forces you to create new spheres of influence and power.
Meal planning is important because it prevents us from being a disappointed wreck when dinner time comes around and we have no clue what to make, or even if we have the ingredients to make the meal. It's a time and a money saver, but most importantly, it frees up valuable brain space. Creating a meal plan prepares us for the week to come and gives us peace of mind that we're organized and can feed ourselves and our family. That's why I do it, and that's why Plan to Eat helps me do it. Your subscription includes access to the Plan to Eat website and fully featured mobile apps on iOS and Android. And Plan to Eat gives you the tools to clip and organize recipes from any website, the ones your family loves and that fit your dietary preferences and needs. And you can create a meal plan around your schedule. Then what happens is the Plan to Eat software automatically creates an organized shopping list based on your plan. So sign up for your free trial at plantoeat.com/timecrafting. That's plantoeat.com/timecrafting. The coupon will be automatically applied to your account and can be used when you're ready to subscribe. It's valid for new customers only. Give Plan to Eat a try today.
We're going to take a short break from the podcast to talk about our sponsor for this week, Gusto. Now, if you have a business or you know someone who does, you probably know that small business owners, well, they wear a lot of hats. And some of those hats are totally great. But some, like filing taxes and running payroll, for example, well, they're not so great. That's where Gusto comes in. Gusto makes payroll, taxes, and HR actually easy for small businesses. Fast, simple payroll processing, benefits, and expert HR support all in one place. Really productive. Gusto automatically pays and files your federal, state, and local taxes, so you don't have to worry about it. Really, really productive. Plus, they make it easy to add on health benefits and even 401ks for your team. Okay, that's ridiculously, really productive. Those old school clunky payroll providers just weren't built for the way modern small businesses work, but Gusto is. Better yet, now is the best time to get set up for the new year, so don't wait. Listeners of the Productivityist podcast get 3 months free when they run their first payroll. So try a demo and see for yourself at gusto.com/timecrafting. That's gusto.com/timecrafting. I'd like to thank Gusto for sponsoring this episode of the Productivityist podcast. And now let's get back to the show. Everyone's heard those other kind of myths might be strong, but the idea that these other stories, that the passion, follow your passion, the 10,000 hours and outliers, which is definitely all Malcolm Gladwell stuff. And then, things like that. What are the elements of Strive that allow people to get to that level of success that they are, quote, striving for?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in order to dive into that, let me share a little bit about my personal story. And this will give you some context because I'm not coming up with a methodology just based on some fabrication. This is actually based on my personal life and how I have personally applied it and seen the results from it.
Sounds good.
So most people, when they see me, whether it's at a conference or on TV or newspaper, they just assume that I come from a great family and that I come from a great background. And this is far from the truth. Matter of fact, I was born into poverty. I didn't know my father, my biological father, and my mother had less than 4th grade education. And I grew up in South Korea into absolute poverty. And I still remember after the harvest, my mom and I would go out to the field to glean, literally picking up the grain that had fallen onto the ground that was left over. And we live month to month, just borrowing to make ends meet. And at school, no matter how hard I try, I couldn't seem to get better than C's because apparently I was copying from the wrong kid. Well, in the 1980s, that's when my mother decided to immigrate us to the U.S. And this was a way for her to give me an opportunity, in particular to give me the opportunity for education. But when we arrived, because of just various different circumstances, she ended up having a mental breakdown. And she was institutionalized, and I was placed into foster care. So since the age of 13, I moved from home to home. And I had no one. I literally should have ended up as nobody. And if you know anything about statistics around foster youth, you know that incarceration, all sorts of negative things happen. So to climb out of that context into becoming somebody productive and influential, it's a pretty amazing story. So really, I'm a living proof of the concept of strive. When we do the things most uncomfortable, we create incredible success. So how do we do this? Part of the problem that I think many of us are kind of stuck in is that we're kind of mired in this notion of autopilot, where day in and day out our habits anchor us down. I mean, we want success out of life, but it somehow tends to elude us. And what I would say is, in order to realize success, we first have to disrupt ourselves. It wasn't until I became very intentional during my 20s and then again in my 40s about disrupting myself that success that I always wanted was finally attainable. So when you look at my background, what I've accomplished, and the affiliations that I have with Singularity University, World Economic Forum, European Commission, Tribeca Film, and so forth, I am where I am today, and I'm literally 1 degree away from just about everybody in the world, is that I had to do the things that took me way outside of my comfort zone. And until I was comfortable exercising on a regular basis in terms of abandoning my comfort zone, I could not have reached that. So what are some of the core aspects of Strive, and how can you start to apply Strive in your life? So in Strive, I lay it out into 6 easy steps. S is in Strive stands for set a goal, meaning that before you can forge ahead, you need to know where you're going. And I want to challenge you, for those that are listening, that your goal has to be more than about yourself. So when we think about books like The Good to Great and Jim Collins, that oftentimes talk about level 5 leadership, it's about leaders who have a greater purpose than themselves. So make sure that when you set your goal, it's looking at the bigger picture. And that goal has to be a guiding light for the rest of your life, not just simply about money, fame, or glory. Number 2, T in Strive stands for think about how to get there and plan for success. The difference between those who realize success and those who have just big dreams is about execution. And you can't execute if you don't know the steps that you need to take. For instance, my lifetime mission statement is to go to the most volatile regions in the world to help create sustainable economic development through use of exponential technologies, and to help local people create jobs that then creates opportunities and economic prosperity for that region. In order to achieve whatever your lifetime goal is, you got to break it down from decades down to yearly, down to monthly, and down to weekly. And everything that you do on a daily basis, small and big, has to get you closer to that long-term goal. Number 3 is R in Strive, which stands for risk. You got to embrace it. Unlike the example that I shared with you earlier, Mike, where people are afraid and they say, I hope this never happens, or I hope that I'm dead, by the time this happens. You have to pursue the thing that's the hardest and most challenging and scariest for you. When you are faced with a decision point, what I would say is, instead of moving away from the one that you're afraid of, seek it out. Maybe you have to speak to a large group of people on stage, or maybe you have to take your savings and investments and start a new business, or maybe it's changing career, or maybe it's going back to school at night or on the weekend. Whatever that hard thing is uniquely for you, that's the first step. And then when we stretch ourselves incrementally and on a consistent basis, we begin to see huge gains. Number 4 is I in Strive, which stands for insights. Meaning, what did you learn from the uncomfortable change that you started to make? And one of the dangers of being a boss, especially for entrepreneurs or small business owners, as well as large CEOs of big corporations, is that many times they start to lose touch with their sense of self-awareness. And this is well documented, plenty of research around that. So really the only way they can start to ensure that you're progressing in the right direction is to be intentional about self-examining your efforts and your process. Maybe you tried something new and maybe you failed, and that's expected. Meaning that just because you try something risky and you failed doesn't mean that it's not working. You got to keep at it. But even if you failed or you took that risk and you felt uncomfortable about that, the key for you in the process is gather insights about you, meaning figure out what you learned and by taking those risks, and continually tweak your approach to optimize. Number 5 in the methodology is V for verify progress, meaning how do you know that you're going the right direction? Just like we have to check Waze or GPS when we're driving, you have to verify your progress. And your progress meter has to be quantifiable, tangibly demonstrates that you're in fact moving incrementally towards that ultimate goal. And lastly, E in Strive stands for enhance yourself mentally and physically. Mike, being a workaholic, I've, really in my early career have let my body go in the sense of I have a herniated disc. I have bad posture and lots of other physical ailments. And it's because it wasn't until my 40s I realized that my journey to success has to be holistic. It's not just about constantly acquiring new knowledge and expertise. In addition to sharpening your mind, you have to also consider your physical, emotional, and spiritual needs.
Right.
So what I do on a daily basis, Mike, is I start each morning with the Bible. I get right with God first. I exercise, and then I meditate. So when I sit down to work, this is where productivity really comes in. Mm-hmm. My mind is clear. Forget sitting down in front of your computer for 4 to 6 hours. No, if you are to be truly productive and you apply this holistic approach, that half an hour of clear thinking and thought process is going to produce more than, languishing for several hours at a time.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating that, and I've talked about this before, and it bears repeating, is most people seem to think that productivity is about speed and getting as much done as possible in as little time as possible. But the problem with that ideal is that what if you're doing the wrong things? What if you're unfocused? And it seems counterproductive or counterintuitive to people up front for people to say, you mean I need to slow down and do things, get clear before I actually move forward? But I don't have time for that. And the interesting thing is that if you don't make time for that, then you could be spending time in completely the wrong places, right?
Mike, you make such an incredible point. That is so important, because what happens is several things is that when you think about the analogy of rocks, pebbles, and sand, rocks representing the things that's most important that you should be focusing most of your majority of your time on, versus sand, those are just things that's pestering you got to get done. We have it upside down oftentimes, where we're spending most of the time working on sand. So we rarely ever get to the pebbles, and definitely never hit the rocks. And then wonder why nothing's really fundamentally changing for us, right?
Yep,
and
absolutely.
Similarly, in the morning, it's a sacrifice, meaning that for me to read, for me to exercise, for me to meditate, that is time away from the computer or on the phone or in meetings. However, by investing that time in building my holistic mind, body, and spirit, I'm able to better focus, and my output is that much greater. So I couldn't agree with you more.
So as we get close to wrapping up here, I want to, out of the 5 elements of Strive, which is the one that's the toughest that you found when you've been, talking to people or sharing this, that has been the toughest for them to kind of either gravitate towards or stick to? Because or is there a couple there that people, and they kind of fall like dominoes. If you miss the one, then the others kind of fall to the side as well. Could you share some of that? Because I think people, when they have a methodology, it's great, but there's always some element where it's a bit of a sticking point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. If you look at the premise of Strive, it's about doing the things most uncomfortable. So right there in your face is exactly what's the hardest part. So this formula or this methodology works. I'm telling you, it works. And there's plenty of examples in the book, famous and well-known people that have applied it and shown it. However, it requires you, the listeners, to take action. So like I said, when you're faced with a binary choice between the easy route versus something that's new, maybe scary, maybe uncomfortable, choose the latter. Right. And more importantly, it's not just, like I said, a single transaction. It is a perspective. It's a mindset, and it's a lifestyle. And I'll tell you, Mike, I can't say I'm the smartest person or the most talented person. But one thing that I know about me is that I'm very resilient, meaning that I may fail today miserably, but tomorrow I'm going to bounce right back up. And I'm going to go at it again. And that is a skill, that is a muscle that needs to be exercised. Mm-hmm. That's resiliency, that resolve. So success doesn't come after a day, a month, a few years. It may take a lifetime. It really is a journey. When we think about incredible figures in history, whether it's Moses or David or modern time, presidents and leaders and tycoons, they succeeded not over the course of a few days or months, but over a lifetime. And it's about continually exercising your muscle to take risks and doing the things uncomfortable. Okay? I have a friend at church. She is I believe in her 40s. Has a family, and her kids are already in high school. But she chose to do something different. She felt that her career was not going where she wanted to go. So she chose to take online courses and just recently finished her master's degree and change her job. I mean, that was 3 years of really hard work, balancing school, balancing work, balancing family life. But now you can tell she is so much happier because she took that risk. And of course, you can imagine what it means on a daily basis, but that's what it means. And for others that are listening, it may mean, coming home, relaxing, but maybe watching a little bit less TV. Maybe it's not 3 hours of, Netflix. Maybe it's an hour of TV. And then reading something that's new, or trying to improve a new skill, joining Toastmasters, or volunteering, developing new skills, whatever it is. That's the key. And as an introvert, I tell you that one of the hardest things for me is going into social gatherings and parties. Very awkward for me. However, I push myself. I'll give you an example. I'm a Tribeca Disruptive Innovation Fellow. And the story is that I was invited to Tribeca to attend. And after the award ceremony, there was a breakout session on AI and robotics, and it was about 30 or 40 people, mostly professors, CEOs of big companies, and prominent startups. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that there was no moderator or facilitator. So what did I do? Again, I didn't know any of these people. I raised my hand and I basically volunteered myself to facilitate the AI robotics working session with these people who are probably much better educated and obviously smarter than I am. And I did that, and our session ran an extra hour or so longer than some of the other workshops. And as a result, because of that work, because of what I did, I eventually became a fellow. And this year, I invited more people to the organization, and one of my colleagues that I had nominated was honored on stage and received the award. So when you start to take risk and do things that's really uncomfortable, mm-hmm. it also opens up new influence and new opportunities to meet people. And when you're in that situation with those new people and the timing is right, guess what happens? You just create new opportunities. So I'm not kidding, Mike, when I say that I'm literally 1 degree away from the most powerful people in the world. And that's not a way for me to boast, but it's a way for me to tell you that by exercising Strive, you can go there as well. It is very much possible. So if you said to me, Scott, I want to be able to meet somebody at the World Economic Forum, or I want to be able to meet someone that runs a sovereign fund, or I want to be able to know who is the head of this particular company, I'm not that far away. I can reach that. And it's because I've stretched and I've grown my influence and power. And for me, it's not about, like I said, for personal gain. It's for level 5 leadership. It is to help people on a large scale and to provide stability in regions.
Scott, this has been a fantastic conversation. There's a lot more people can explore. I encourage people to pick up your book, Strive. And I'll have all the links in the show notes, as well as some of the stuff we talked about, which is, it's interesting because you'll be able to look at some of the misconceptions that we talked about earlier, as well as, and I'll even put a link to that rock, pebbles, and sand story, because it's a good one. It's always a good little parable to throw in there. Scott, where can people find more about you and your work online?
Absolutely. Just come to my website, scottamyx.com, SCOTTAMYX.com. And I just want to say, I want to challenge all of you, the listeners, to do the things that's most uncomfortable for you. You have the opportunity to realize great success. It's available to everyone. It really is.
Scott, thanks so much for joining me today on the Productivityist Podcast.
Thank you, Mike.
Big thanks to Scott Amyx for joining me this week on the podcast. I really enjoy talking to people who I've not really come across before. And while that can be uncomfortable, especially if you're not very familiar, Scott had a really interesting way to make me feel comfortable throughout this episode. So I really like what he had to offer, and I hope you'll give the book a try. It's Strive. So pick that book up. All of the links, including where you can pick up the book, is available at productivityist.transistor.fm/218. And before I wrap up, I want to say, if you like this episode, please give it a rating and review in iTunes or Apple Podcasts or whatever it's called these days, as well as wherever you're listening to podcasts, if it's not those places or that place. It just helps people find the show, and it lets me know what we're doing wrong, what we could get better at, and that way we can strive to get better at that. See what I did there? Big thanks to John Polstra for producing the show. Big thanks to Gusto for sponsoring this show. And don't forget, you can get your 3 months free when you run your first payroll by going to gusto.com/timecrafting. So do that now and then go and leave the rating and review. I think that's the order that you need to do them in. All right, that's it for this week. Thanks for listening. I really do appreciate it. And until next time, I'm Mike Vardy, the host of the Productivityist podcast, reminding you to stop guessing and start going. We'll see you next time.